Hi, friends. I'm Emily Lay, and you're listening to the Simplified podcast. If you're looking for a quiet place where you can filter out the noise and the hustle, then this is it. Every week, I invite you to slow down and join me to explore practical ways to organize and automate the complicated parts of life so you can focus on what truly matters most. If you're looking to deepen your faith walk this year, Team Simplified made a faith workbook just for you. I've always found that writing helps me center my thoughts and think about all the blessings I have, the challenges I'm facing, and how to connect with others through it all. The Faith Workbook is a wonderful way to collect your thoughts during a quiet morning, or during your devotional time, or anytime you have a spare moment on the go. You can get your Faith Workbook, along with many others, right now at emilylay.com. A few years ago, I started to notice that people were throwing around a word I'd never heard before, Enneagram, and I heard it everywhere. My friends were saying it, Instagram was saying it, there were books being written about it. All of a sudden, it was everywhere, and everyone was telling me it was life-changing. It helped them discover more about themselves and how other people worked. And I thought that was super interesting, so I took a test to discover my own Enneagram type. I took the one at yourenneagramcoach.com. I was skeptical at first, but thought it might be fun to answer a few questions about my thought processes and motivations, so I went for it. And the result was absolutely spot on. Of the 9 Enneagram personality types, the test determined that I am an Enneagram Type 2, which is also known as the supportive advisor. And here's what the test told me. At your best, you are loving, compassionate, and nurturing. At your worst, you are indirect, possessive, and needy. Whoa. It was crazy to see myself like that, and it was all very accurate. I kept reading about the Type 2 strengths and weaknesses, who they are when they're at their best and who they are when they're unhealthy. It felt like pulling back the curtain and peeking into my heart from an outsider's perspective. I was really floored by what my results said about my greatest fear, that I have a core fear of being rejected and unwanted, being thought worthless, needy, inconsequential, dispensable, or unworthy of love. I mean, that's not even fun to say out loud. That is so true, you guys, for me. But that's not who I was made to be. And that was the best part about what I learned. Stepping boldly into the strength and spirit you have means knowing that you, yes, you, are beloved just as you are. It means letting go of your old story so that you can become who you were made to be. And that is exactly what my guest today is so good at. You guys, I am so excited and honored to have Ian Morgan Cron on our podcast today. He is just fantastic. I am a huge fan of his work. His books are incredible. And if any of you are also fellow Enneagram enthusiasts like I am, I bet you've heard of him. Ian is a champion of the Enneagram, an awakener of people, and the best-selling author of a popular Enneagram book that I absolutely loved and have on my shelf in my living room called The Road Back to You. He's also host of Typology, a podcast that explores the mystery of the human personality and how we can use the Enneagram as a tool to become our most authentic selves. Ian just released a new book called The Story of You, an Enneagram journey to becoming your true self, which we are going to talk about today. I think it'll be a super valuable tool as you live more into the story of the person you're becoming. I am just thrilled for you guys to hear from Ian today. We had the most incredible conversation. We talked a little bit about my personality type and some things that I've learned. We talked about Ian's story and how he came to love the Enneagram, some of the things that he's been through that have shaped his story, and how he is living his most authentic story right now. Without further ado, here is my conversation with therapist and fellow podcaster, Ian Cron. Well, Ian, I'm so glad you're here. I have been a big fan of yours, actually, for a long time. Big fan of your books. And I'm so excited about your newest book coming out. And I'm glad to have you here to talk all about the Enneagram. You are the Enneagram expert. I'm a fan of the Enneagram, and I know a lot of my listeners are too. But we may have some listeners today who are new to the Enneagram. So I thought we could just kick things off before we get too far into our chat today. Will you just tell us a little bit about what the Enneagram is and why it has been a useful tool for you and so many others?
Hmm. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here with you. Yeah, so the Enneagram is an ancient personality typing system that teaches there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which each of us gravitates toward and adopts in childhood as a way to feel safe, to cope, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the new world of relationships in which we find ourselves. Really importantly, each of those 9 Enneagram types, personality types, has an unconscious motivation or underlying belief that powerfully influences how that personality habitually and predictably really acts, thinks, and feels from moment to moment on a daily basis.
Yeah. Am I blushing? Because when I took the test, I thought for sure I knew which one of the nine I would be. I knew I would fall somewhere in the upper right quadrant, the one, two, three. And a recovering perfectionist by nature, I thought I would definitely be a one or potentially a three because I'm just always been a go getter. And I'm a two.
Mm.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. I started learning more about, what a two is. And then I started reading, actually through through some of your books, I read about what a two is when a two is at her worst. And that was the part where I was like, oh, this is me.
Oh, yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been seen, and that I just think it's such a fascinating tool to know some of the motivators behind why people are the way that they are. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but Brian, my husband, and I both have taken it, and when we sat down and talked about what a two and a three are at their best and their worst, it was really, really eye opening for us as
Mm.
well.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's really common for people when they first discover their type to really focus their attention on what's not great about it, like when it's not, the shadow side of the type.
Yeah.
But eventually, my hope is that they realize that when each of the 9 types is self-aware and in a good space, gosh, each of them is beautiful, and we should celebrate the gifts that each of these types brings to the world when they're healthy.
I love that. I have a team of 8 women who work with me, and I love the fact that we are kind of all across the board with our types. And so we each kind of have a different lane, a different thing that, lights us up and makes us excited about work and excited about working with people. And yeah, it's been really fun to kind of bring that group of people together. Well, I'm so excited about your new book, which is out now, called The Story of You. And you said something really early on in the book that caught me and never let me go. You said, all transformation begins with story transformation. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, actually, I was quoting a professor at Northwestern University who is a pioneer in what's called narrative therapy.
Wow.
And, all of us as little people, I think, craft a story that we tell ourselves and others about who we are and how we think the world works.
Mm.
That story is made up of internalized messages, real or perceived, that we pick up from the important people in our lives, parents, peers, teachers, aunts and uncles, our culture. We just pick up so many messages, many of which are unhealthy and unhelpful. Now, those stories, with all of their, false beliefs and whatnot, really help us as little kids make sense of everything that's happening to us. And in a way, they're kind of helpful. But when we unconsciously bring those old stories with their negative internalized messages and their false beliefs and all of that stuff, and we continue to live in that story as adults,
Mm-hmm.
it really begins to wreak havoc on our lives. And the book suggests that there are not just 9 personality types, but really there are 9 stories that
Mm.
people tend to gravitate toward and adopt in childhood. And really, if we want to experience transformation, we really have to, in adulthood, challenge identify and deconstruct and the old story, sort of decouple ourselves from it, and then really craft and rewrite a new story, because you're not stuck. Like you're the narrator here. Okay. So you have the freedom to say, man, this old story does not serve me anymore. And I'm now going to adopt a new story that really is in alignment with my values and with who I want to be as a person.
I love that. So, like I said, I'm a two, and I kind of grew up with the idea. I mean, my family's wonderful, my parents are wonderful, but I kind of grew up with this love for helping other people, for serving, for just bringing good to others and filling gaps when needed. But in my own life as an adult, I sometimes tend to put myself on the back burner and burn out, and then just get mad at everybody that needs my help.
Yeah.
I have three kids and busy with work. And so just as of lately, like maybe the past couple of months, I have decided to flip that on its head and see what happens when I start to put Emily first. And if maybe I'm a better two, when I do that. So
That's a better story, isn't it? So think of it this way: the underlying premise, right, of the two helper story, and I hope all your listeners know the 9 types. I'd be happy to go through them, but the two helper has this belief that in order to be loved, I have to meet the needs of others while at the same time not acknowledging my own personal needs. And when I'm not very healthy in that old story, this is because I really want to be liked. The two really wants to be liked. And so in this bid to win the appreciation and the approval of others, sometimes the two will meet the needs of others or help other people in a kind of strategic or calculated way. And that old story, that story, you got a lot of strokes for that story as a little kid, right? Oh, she's so helpful. She's so nice. She's always there, right? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be a helper, but when it's in that unhealthy sense of the word, and you bring that old story into adulthood, it's a recipe for codependency. It's a recipe for not taking care of yourself. It's a recipe for really relying on helping others to win love. And that is not how the universe works.
no, we have this joke in our house that sometimes mom needs a trophy, and it is so true.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
now we have a fake trophy. It's a Mickey Mouse trophy that we got. This golden Mickey. It looks like an Oscar. And every now and then, they'll go get the trophy out and be like, "Mom, we love you. We appreciate you for all that you do. We know you need a trophy," and it is so true. But I feel like once you kind of start rewriting that for yourself and say, "I'm gonna give myself my own dang trophy," right?
Right. Right.
That and then finding your worth in other ways. I feel like I could talk to you about this forever. It could be a therapy session.
Wouldn't be the first one.
I believe it. Well, tell me about you, like in your own life. How did you go from your old story to your new story? And if you will, what was the old story you were telling yourself, and how did you identify or recognize, like, hey, this doesn't fit anymore?
Right. So years ago, I mean, I'm talking like when I was in my 20s, late 20s, I had a alcohol and drug addiction problem. And I had a sponsor early on who heard me give a talk to a recovery group one night. I had been invited to speak, and he heard me tell my story. And here was the gist of my story, right? Because part of the meeting was just, to share your story and of recovery.
Yeah.
And so I stood up and I said, I grew up myself in a home with an alcoholic and drug addicted dad who actually eventually died from his disease. And I grew up thinking, why doesn't my dad love me? Well, it must be because I'm missing something inside that everyone else seems to have, but I don't. And, the only way I'm going to know wholeness and belonging and love in the world is if I compensate for the missing piece by being special and unique. Right. And, that's the classic Enneagram 4 story. That's my type. Right. And this sponsor said to me after listening to me, he was about 70, he was a therapist. And he said to me, sort of a little bit like challenging me, he said, Ian, have you ever wondered if you're the story you tell yourself about who you are and how the world works is true? And I was like, I've never questioned that. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I never stopped to question my story. And he's like, and I don't mean the facts of the story, but I mean the story I crafted around what all those things that happened to me meant. Right. And then years later, when I learned the Enneagram, I was like, wait a minute. These are 9 stories that are untrue. I call them broken stories.
Oh,
Like, like mine was a broken story. The story you heard growing up was a broken story. And of course, you did have great parents and you did, you know what I'm saying? But
yeah,
there's
yeah.
no way any of us, as a therapist, I can just tell you, ain't nobody got a story that isn't dinged, full of scratches and dents and false ideas and beliefs. And you know, all of us go through little traumas or big traumas in life, and they all feed us negative, you know, ideas about ourselves and a negative story. And I realized, wow, these 9 stories, these broken stories, seem to show up an awful lot in the world. And so let's learn which of these stories is ours. Let's learn how to bust out of them and create a new story. For me, that journey involved, you know, like it would, you know, a lot of work. And I wanted to simplify the work that I had to do for people so that they would become aware that, I can live a new story and here's how.
Ah, I love that. We talk a lot. So I own a planner company, a Simplified planner,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk a lot about fresh starts. And it's funny, like sometimes we think we can just achieve a fresh start or a new me or January 1, here I go, by organizing our pantry or, buying something new or buying a new planner and getting my act together. But really, that's so impossible unless you do the heart work first. You do the heart work and you understand what's working, what's not working, why you're doing things the way you're doing them now, and why you really want something new too. So I love that. Real quick, where would you encourage people to go if they don't know their Enneagram type? Where can they take a test maybe to find out what their Enneagram type is?
Sure. Well, really 3 ways. One is they can go to my website, Ian Morgan Cron, and maybe it'll be in the show notes. And they can take my IEQ 9 assessment, which is a really strong, validated test. Or other people learn differently. They could read my book, the Road Back to You, which was the
That's the
one.
one.
Right. That's helpful. Or they could also take my course, Discovering You, which is on my website. And you know, that's people learn differently. Sometimes people like to watch something, some people like to read something, some people like to take a test. I like to do more than one thing. So,
Yeah.
and I just want to just say one thing, or you said something brilliant before. Like I am a big believer, have a planner, get organized. Let's have fresh starts. I mean, these are great habits and skills to have. But if we really want to have a fresh start, if we really want to experience deep inner transformation, yes, we have to do the hard work. And there's a quote from Dan McAdams, what you mentioned earlier, all transformation is story transformation. Let's face it, just reading a book about the Enneagram ain't going to do much except give you a type. Having a planner isn't going to revolutionize your life from a deep, profound place. That means in order to experience that, I'm convinced you have to change the story in which you live. Continue using a planner. I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying?
Same.
Like that's really, exercise, do yoga, eat your meals correctly. I'm not saying,
Yeah.
but man, if you want to change, you got to face the story that you've been living and decide for yourself, does this serve me anymore? And if it doesn't, time to rewrite it.
Amen. And you have the agency and the power, and only you, to do that,
Yes.
I love that. One of my other favorite quotes from the book, we can't change what happened to us in the past, but we can change how we show up for life in the present.
Hmm.
I love that. Will you talk to me a little bit more about that idea?
Yeah, I remember someone was asking me at a conference in front of a lot of people. They said, "What would your 21-year-old self tell yourself today?" Right?
Oh,
And for some reason, I mean, you ever have someone ask you a question in a situation like that and something comes out of your mouth before you can edit it?
Yes.
Like it just comes out and
Where
you're
did that
like,
come from?
where did that come from? And I got all emotional when I said it. It just came from such a deep place. I said, my 21-year-old, if I would tell my 21-year-old self, you are not what you survived.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, whoa. And I got all choked up and I was like, I don't know where that came from, but that was such a truth that it even surprised me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, like people are not what they've survived in the past. That doesn't have to define you. It's not who you are. It's what happened to you. And those are two different things. And, isn't it true that oftentimes what holds us back isn't what happened to us, but the way that we interpreted it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if something negative happens to us as little kids, and then we interpret it to mean that we're unworthy of love. Mm. That's how we interpreted the event. But what if, I mean, sure, the event happened, but what if your interpretation of it was wrong? It clearly was. Yeah. But we carry those beliefs with us as though we can't question them or challenge them now. Yeah. Yeah. And of course you can and live differently in the present than you had previously for maybe decades.
Yeah. That's, you asked me once on another podcast, you said to me, and it was the first time I'd ever been asked this question. I think it was when I was doing podcasts for Growing Boldly, my last book. And you asked me if I had ever been in therapy. And I said, actually, I had just started it. And it's not something I had ever considered before, but I had just started it. And it was the bravest thing for me to make that phone call and show up in that office and say I don't want to be here. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't have any majorly tragic things that have happened to me, but through giving life by speaking them out loud, things in my past, mistakes I've made, stuff that's happened to me, it almost released it out of me a little bit. It released the power that it had over me that I didn't even realize. That was really, really transformational. So I think there's something really powerful about saying things like you did when you were asked that question that maybe you're kind of where did that come from? Oh, I actually do believe that about myself, or I actually am internalizing this thing negatively. So I think there's a lot of power in that.
Mm. And as you do that work, what begins to happen is you are crafting a new story. And yet I don't think people really, and this was the motivation behind writing the story of you, I don't think people know they can do that. Yeah. Nor do they have the language of story to realize that that's the work. You know what I mean? It's well, how do I think about therapy? And how do I think about the work? You know what I mean? That people talk about all the time. It's yeah, it's oh, well, let's just start here. Let's start with just changing the whole, in the book, I talk about how important it is to name or title your old story and title the new story. And so for me, I would say the title of my old story was The Lost Boy. Oh. And my new story that I've crafted over the years and using some of the stuff that I talk about in the book is The Redeemed Man.
Oh, that's a good one.
And so those are two different stories, right? Yeah. I just have completely reinterpreted everything that happened. I can't change the facts, but I can change what I think they meant. And that's part of the crafting of this new narrative. And I got to tell you, the difference between living in that old story and in the new story in which I inhabit now, it's like two different universes.
That's incredible. I love the idea of naming it. It almost you can't ever put your past in a package and tie it with a bow, but it does kind of say here it is, and we're going to put it over here, deal with it, but we're also going to start new. And it draws a line in the sand and says, this is the before and this is the after, which.
Yeah. Almost like OS and NS. You just made me think that old story. And now it's 2022 NS, not, BC or AD, it's no, it's NS, new story.
I love that. I think early in my motherhood journey, I really sacrificed myself on the altar of motherhood and entrepreneurship. And I was growing a family, and it was not easy. Infertility, all kinds of stuff. I was growing a business, and it was not easy. We started from nowhere. And so I just worked and worked and worked. And I knew if I worked hard enough, all the right things would happen. And obviously life doesn't work that way. And so just really recently ended up at a point where, over the past 3 or 4 years said, I don't have to prove myself. Like, I don't have to work that hard. It's okay to slow down and actually enjoy things and not be constantly trying to earn a trophy.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm going to be podcaster for a
Okay,
second.
I'm in.
I'm going to ask you a question that you may not be able to answer in the moment, and that's cool. You can just put it aside and maybe think about it. But what would you title your old story?
Workhorse. Like, that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Great.
Workhorse.
Perfect. I love that. Workhorse. And what would you like the title of your new story to be?
It would involve the word honoring,
Mm.
not working, but honoring. Like
Mm.
honoring myself, honoring my family, honoring the work, honoring God.
Yeah.
Honoring.
I love all of those. And so maybe that's something, in the days to come, it's a
Yeah,
really good exercise driving in the car, or whatever, taking a walk and thinking, yeah, what would I title that new story?
I
Like,
love that.
yeah, like what new story would I like to live in now that reflects who I am as an adult? So I no longer have to live in a children's book.
No longer have to live in a children's book. I love that. That's beautiful. Which of your books would you recommend someone start with first? I get asked that a lot about my own, and I have thoughts, but I'm wondering for you, what would you say?
Well, of course, I'm out here selling a new book, so I'd always say the story of
The
you,
story of
right?
you.
I mean, that's kind of my work right now. It really depends on what people want. My first book, Chasing Francis, was a novel. My second book, Jesus, My Father, the CIA and Me, was a memoir.
Yeah.
But obviously, books build on each other, and the most. And again, I'm not just saying this because it's a new book and I want to, tweak sales up, but this book builds on those others, right?
I love that.
And
Yeah.
and so I guess I say start with the new one and
Okay.
then go back. Then I would say go to the road back to you, right?
I love that.
And then if you have interest in those other types of books, I'd be happy if you read any of them. But
I love that. Well, they almost all give context to the previous ones because as you write, you're growing and you're learning.
exactly,
Yeah, it's a really
exactly.
cool story. Okay, so we like to do a thing on the podcast at the very end where we go through what we call a rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you just say whatever comes to your mind. You ready?
Got it.
Okay, you're an Enneagram 4. So what is your favorite Enneagram 4 superpower?
Oh, I would say just my creativity. Fours are disproportionately represented in the creative arts.
Mm.
And I really have a deep imagination. I love language. I was a songwriter,
Cool.
living here in Nashville as a songwriter. And, I'm able to, I think one of the gifts I have, if I can be so bold, is that I have a way of being able to say clearly what other people feel vaguely.
Mm. Yeah.
And for me, I think that's one of the gifts of Enneagram 4s, not just me.
My husband is a 3 with a 4 wing, and I see that in him as well. That's
Mm.
interesting. Okay, so thinking about all the other Enneagram types, which superpower do you wish you could steal from somebody?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Oh, wow. Man, there's something I would take from each of them.
Yeah.
Which one would I want most? Huh. Um, I guess the Enneagram 9, when it's healthy, has this sort of unshakable faith that all will be well, all will be well, all manner of things shall be well. And it's like they don't they don't light their hair on fire. They don't run around in this sort of ego panic, like it's just this rich sort of steady belief that don't worry, it's all going to be okay.
Oh,
You're okay. The
I just
universe
hired
is
a
okay.
9. That makes me so happy.
Yeah, you'll love them.
That's wonderful. I love that. Okay, what is one thing that you're not very good at, but you do it anyway? You love to do it anyway.
First thing that came to my mind, yoga.
Really?
Yeah, I go to yoga
That's awesome.
3 or 4 times a week.
Do you really? What do you
I
love most
do.
about it?
Well, first of all, it's so challenging. I always feel it's hot yoga too. It's Bikram yoga. And
I did that one time.
yeah, and I just feel my body just feels so good afterwards. And I like the meditative part of it, the
Yeah.
breathing work. I'm a 4. So, I'm into
Yeah.
all this. I love the woo-woo stuff,
I love it.
And so, yeah, I'm growing all the time and getting better at yoga. And I love the fact that I have to suck at it in front of other people.
It's not
Because
easy for me.
no, I mean, it's just good for me.
That's so
It's
funny.
so good for me just to get in there and say, don't care about what your tummy looks like in front of all these people. And don't worry
Yeah.
about the fact that you're older than you could probably be the father of everybody in this room. And don't worry about your stomach growling right now in this, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's such a good thing for me to like let go of my, I don't know, you know how it is, my preening
Of
pride.
course. I did hot yoga one time, and the entire time all I could think was get me out.
Yeah, it's a little tough in the beginning. You're right.
I probably need to go back. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm just so fascinated by the Enneagram. I hope that everyone will go pick up your book, The Story of You. Tell everybody where they can find the book, they can find you and follow you from here.
Sure, thanks. So they can go to certainly Amazon, Barnes and Noble, their local bookseller. It's out there and about. It is called The Story of You: An Enneagram Journey to Becoming Your True Self. And I got to say, I'm really pumped about it. I really love this book. And you can go to my website, Ian Morgan Cron, and I'll spell it because it's a kooky name, IANMORGANCRON.com. And they can learn about my courses. They can learn about my books. They can learn about my assessment, the IEQ 9, certainly at Ian Morgan Cron across all the socials. And yeah, I think that kind of covers it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
I loved it. Thank you so much, Emily.
You guys, wasn't that fantastic? I absolutely just love talking to Ian. I am fascinated by the Enneagram. It's something that I use personally and professionally and just love learning more about because it helps me connect to my people in my life and understand people so much better. As we close out this episode, I'd like to say a blessing for you as we leave this time together and get back into our days. May you take slow, gentle steps toward your new story each day. May you embrace who you are, where you've been, and where you're headed. And may you trust that although you'll face hardship along the way, in the end, you will soar. As always, I like to leave a little tip to help you put what we've talked about today into practice, so here is your task for this week. The idea of living into a new story can sound a little big for a Thursday afternoon, but starting something in a small way still means that you're starting something, and that's good enough for me. Right now, think about a word that you'd like to be part of your new story. Then, beginning with the words I am, make a brief, bold statement about yourself. I am curious. I am wholehearted. I am confident. Even if it's a little hard to believe right now, the more you say that to yourself, the more you'll begin to believe it. Just try it and tell me how it goes. Thank you for listening to the Simplified podcast. I hope today's episode gave you permission to shed the old story that doesn't serve you and start living into the new one you were made for all along. You can find show notes for this episode at emilylay.com/podcast, where you can check out links and resources I mentioned here, and you can shop the Simplified brand of planners and products. If you follow me on social, then you might have seen some exciting news I shared a couple weeks ago. I have written a children's book. It's called You're Always Enough and More Than I Hoped For. It's my sincere hope that this book will remind kids and adults of all ages that they are always enough and that God made them who they are on purpose for a purpose. It comes out in May, but you can pre-order your copy today so it comes right to your doorstep when it's out. Before you go, I have a quick favor to ask. If you love this show, would you go to your podcast provider and leave a review? I want more people reaching for a life that's a bit more slow and sweet and good, and leaving a review helps your podcast provider get this show to more people who'd enjoy it. If you've left a review, thank you so much. Please know I've read all of your words and take them to heart. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Bye.